You know that feeling when you wake up from a dream, and for just a few seconds you can still feel it, the emotions, the sensations, the absolute certainty that what you were experiencing was real. And then it fades, and you are left with this haunting sense that you have forgotten something incredibly important, something your soul knew but your mind cannot quite grasp anymore. I remember the exact moment when I first experienced that feeling, not in sleep, but wide awake, sitting in a church pew at 17 years old, listening to a pastor promise us all that if we just believed, if we just had faith, we would ascend to heaven when we died. We would walk through pearly gates into eternal paradise. And something inside me, something I had never consciously acknowledged before, screamed that this was not the whole truth. It was not that I thought he was lying, but rather that he was repeating a story he had been told. A story that had been carefully edited, deliberately simplified, stripped of its most powerful and liberating truths. That day I felt like a stranger in my own religious tradition, like someone who remembered a language that everyone else had forgotten, and that restless, aching sensation of knowing there was something beyond what I was being taught. That feeling of spiritual homesickness for a truth I could not name, that was the beginning of my Gnostic awakening. I spent the next decade searching, reading texts that were banned, studying traditions that were persecuted, talking to mystics who had been silenced, and what I discovered shattered everything I thought I knew about Jesus, about salvation, about what actually happens when we die, and about why the early church fathers worked so desperately hard to hide these teachings from us. What I am about to share with you in this video was considered so dangerous, so threatening to institutional religious control, that people were tortured and killed for teaching it, entire communities were massacred, libraries were burned, and texts were buried in the desert for over 1500 years. And here is what they did not want you to know. Jesus never promised you heaven, not the way you have been taught to understand it. And that white light that people see in near-death experiences, that tunnel of brilliant, welcoming, peaceful light that we have all been conditioned to believe is the doorway to paradise. According to the suppressed Gnostic Gospels, according to the mystics who were burned at the stake for teaching this, that light is not liberation. It is the final trap, the ultimate illusion designed to keep your divine spark, your true eternal essence, imprisoned in the cycle of reincarnation, recycled back into this material realm of suffering and ignorance. And everything you are about to learn in the next few minutes will reveal exactly how this system works, why it was hidden from you, and most importantly, how to see through it and claim the true liberation that is your birthright as a divine being. Before I reveal the specific Gnostic knowledge that was suppressed about the white light and what Jesus actually taught about transcending it, I need you to understand something crucial if you are a sincere seeker of hidden truth and you want to continue this journey of awakening with me. Someone who will not feed you comfortable lies but will share the profound mysteries that have been deliberately concealed. Then subscribe to this channel right now and activate the notification bell, because what comes next will unveil secrets that have been hidden for millennia. And you will not want to miss the future teachings I will share with you as your friend and guide on this path. The knowledge I am about to reveal does not come from modern New Age speculation or personal opinion. This comes directly from the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the Gnostic Gospels that were buried in Egypt in the 4th century to protect them from destruction when the Roman Church consolidated power and began systematically erasing all forms of Christianity that taught direct knowledge over blind faith. This channel exists for seekers like you, for those who have always felt that mainstream religion was feeding them a simplified, controlled version of truth. And I want to walk this path with you, revealing layer after layer of the mysteries that were stolen from us. Now let me tell you exactly what you are going to discover in the next several minutes, and I want you to prepare yourself, because this knowledge has the power to completely transform your understanding of reality, of death, of consciousness itself, and of what true spiritual liberation actually means. You are going to learn why the Gnostic Christians, the original followers who preserved the secret teachings of Jesus, believed that the material world itself is a prison constructed by a false god they called the demiurge, a lesser deity who believes himself to be the supreme creator but is actually ignorant of the true divine realm that exists beyond his flawed creation. You will discover why they taught that each human being carries within them a spark of the true divine light, a fragment of the ultimate Godhead that became trapped in matter, and that the entire structure of this reality, including the cycle of death and reincarnation, is designed to keep that spark imprisoned, to keep you recycling through lifetimes, harvesting your spiritual energy, your experiences, your suffering, feeding the archons, the rulers of this false realm, who depend on keeping you ignorant of your true nature. You are going to learn what the Gnostic texts actually say about the white light phenomenon, why it appears so appealing and peaceful, why it feels like home, and why that feeling is the most sophisticated trap ever devised. a lure that captures the soul at its most vulnerable moment and sends it back into incarnation rather than allowing it to transcend this entire counterfeit reality. And most crucially, you will discover what Jesus, according to these suppressed gospels, actually taught about navigating death, about recognizing the false lights and the deceptive entities that present themselves as angels and guides, and about the true path to the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality that exists beyond all of this, the realm of pure consciousness and absolute freedom that is your real home, the place your soul remembers even though your mind has forgotten. But I am not going to give you all of this knowledge at once, because each layer builds upon the previous one, each teaching unlocks the next, and if you try to run before you can walk, you will miss the subtle but absolutely essential details that make the difference between intellectual understanding and actual gnosis, between merely knowing about these things and truly seeing through the veil of illusion that has kept humanity enslaved for eons. Let me take you back to the winter of 1945, to a small Egyptian town near the Nile called Nag Hammadi, where a farmer digging for fertilizer near a cliff accidentally struck a large earthenware jar with his shovel, and when he broke it open, perhaps hoping to find gold or treasure, what he discovered instead was worth infinitely more. 13 leather-bound codices containing over 50 different texts, gospels and teachings and revelations that had been hidden in the desert sand for nearly 1600 years, sealed away from the world right around the time that the Roman Emperor Constantine was consolidating Christianity into a single controllable institution, eliminating all the diverse, mystical, knowledge-based forms of the faith and replacing them with a standardized, belief-based religion that would serve the purposes of empire rather than the liberation of consciousness. Among these recovered texts were the Gospel of Thomas, containing the secret sayings of Jesus that emphasize direct knowledge over faith, the Gospel of Philip, which reveals the mysteries of the bridal chamber and spiritual union, the Apocryphon of John, which details the creation of the material world by the demiurge and the entrapment of divine light in matter, and the Pistis Sophia, an extended dialogue where Jesus teaches about the multiple levels of reality, the archons who rule each level, and the specific knowledge required to pass through them. These were not fringe documents written by heretics inventing a new religion. These were preserved teachings that represented what many early Christian communities actually believed and practiced, forms of Christianity that were systematically destroyed because they taught something the institutional church found unacceptable, that you do not need a priest or a church or an institution to access the divine, that salvation is not about belief in doctrines, but about awakening to direct knowledge. Gnosis of your true nature as a divine being temporarily trapped in a false material reality. The cosmology presented in these texts is radically different from what you were taught in Sunday school, and understanding it is absolutely essential to grasping why the white light is a trap rather than a liberation. According to the Gnostic understanding, before anything else existed, there was the monad, the one, the ineffable, unknowable supreme source of all consciousness, existing in absolute perfection and fullness, what the Gnostics called the pleroma. From this infinite divine consciousness emanated pairs of divine beings called aeons, aspects or expressions of the divine nature, each one perfect, each one conscious, each one existing in this realm of pure light and absolute freedom. And one of these aeons was Sophia, whose name means wisdom. And Sophia, filled with love and creative desire, wished to create something, to emanate something of her own. But she attempted to do this without her consort, without her divine partner, violating the perfect balance of the pleroma. And what she emanated was imperfect, a being of ignorance rather than wisdom, a being of pride rather than humility. And this being, who came to be called the demiurge, meaning craftsman or builder, did not realize he was a flawed creation born from Sophia's error. He looked around and saw only himself and the void, and he declared, "I am God, there is no other God besides me," and in his ignorance and arrogance, he set about creating, fashioning a material realm, in imitation of the divine pleroma he had never seen, creating matter, creating time, creating the physical universe with all its laws and limitations, creating angels and authorities and rulers to govern his creation, beings that the Gnostics called archons, which means rulers or authorities, and these archons, like their creator, are ignorant of the true God. They believe the demiurge is the supreme creator, and they work to maintain control over the material realm he has fashioned, to keep order, to enforce the laws, to trap consciousness in matter and time. But here is the crucial detail that changes everything. When Sophia realized what she had done, when she saw the flawed, ignorant being she had emanated, and the false material world he was creating in his ignorance, she felt deep remorse, and in her compassion, she breathed something into this material creation. She infused it with sparks of the divine light, fragments of the true pleroma, and these sparks of divine consciousness became trapped in the material bodies that the demiurge was creating, imprisoned in flesh, bound by time, subject to death and forgetting, recycling through incarnation after incarnation. And this is what you are. You are not primarily a body with a soul. You are a fragment of eternal divine light that has been clothed in matter, trapped in a system designed to keep you ignorant of your true nature, to keep you focused on material concerns, physical survival, emotional dramas, anything and everything that prevents you from remembering that you are not. From here that this entire reality is a prison, and that beyond it exists your true home, the pleroma, the fullness of divine consciousness and absolute freedom. The demiurge and his archons are not evil in the sense of wanting to cause suffering for its own sake. They are ignorant. They genuinely believe they are maintaining a proper order. They genuinely believe they are serving the highest God, not realizing that they themselves are trapped in a false understanding of reality. And they work tirelessly to keep souls imprisoned here because this realm, this material universe, feeds on consciousness. It requires the energy of these divine sparks to continue existing, and the primary mechanism for keeping souls trapped, for preventing them from escaping back to the pleroma, is the reincarnation cycle, the wheel of birth and death and rebirth that captures consciousness and recycles it endlessly through physical existence. And this is where the white light comes in. This is where we get to the heart of what Jesus actually taught about death and liberation according to the suppressed Gnostic Gospels. Before I go deeper into what the white light actually is, and why the Gnostic mystics warn against it, I need to pause and ask you something that very few people have the courage to ask themselves with complete honesty. Have you ever felt like you do not really belong in this world? Like there is something fundamentally wrong with the reality that everyone else accepts as normal, as if your soul remembers something that your mind has forgotten. That sensation of being a stranger in a strange land, of searching for answers that no one around you even seems to question. That is the first whisper of gnosis awakening within you. If right now you recognize that you have always felt this deep spiritual restlessness, this thirst for hidden truths, I want you to do something powerful. Write in the comments right now the phrase, "I awaken from the sleep of ignorance." Do not underestimate the power of this public declaration. When you decree that you are waking up, that you no longer accept the imposed illusions, something fundamental shifts in your consciousness. And beyond that, by commenting, you are helping the algorithm bring this Gnostic knowledge to other sincere seekers who right now are wandering lost, searching for the same truths you are. Do not keep this knowledge only for yourself. Right now, I awaken from the sleep of ignorance and allow your declaration to serve as a beacon for other pilgrims on the Gnostic path. Now let me reveal what the Gnostic texts actually teach about the white light, and I want you to understand that what I am sharing comes directly from ancient sources, from the Pistis Sophia, from the secret book of John, from the testimony of mystics like the Cathars who were massacred in southern France for teaching these truths, from the Bogomils who were persecuted in Eastern Europe, from countless traditions that preserve this knowledge at tremendous cost. When a person dies, according to these teachings, the soul begins to rise from the body, and as it rises, it encounters various levels of reality, various realms governed by different archonic powers, and these powers have one primary function: to capture souls and recycle them back into incarnation, to prevent them from escaping the material realm entirely. The soul, at the moment of death, is in a vulnerable state. It is confused, disoriented. It has just left the only reality it consciously remembers, and it is desperately seeking safety, seeking home, seeking peace. And this is when the archons deploy their most sophisticated trap, the white light. The texts describe this light as brilliant, overwhelmingly beautiful, radiating peace and love, often accompanied by beings that appear as angels or deceased loved ones, figures of authority or comfort. And this light feels like home. It feels like the divine. It feels like exactly what you have been searching for your entire life. And almost every soul, when confronted with this radiant, welcoming presence, moves toward it willingly, joyfully, believing they are finally returning to God, to Source, to heaven. And this is the trap. The Gnostic texts are explicit about this. They warn that the archons disguise themselves as beings of light. They create false versions of paradise, comforting illusions designed to capture the soul at its most vulnerable moment. And when the soul enters this false light, when it surrenders to what it believes is divine love and acceptance, it is actually entering a processing system that will erase its memories, implant new desires and attachments, and send it back into another physical incarnation, wiping clean its knowledge of previous lives, resetting its consciousness, ensuring it remains trapped in the cycle. This is why Jesus, in the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, speaks about the importance of receiving the true light while still alive, of awakening to gnosis before death, so that the soul is not deceived by the false lights it will encounter. And in the Pistis Sophia, Jesus provides detailed instructions about how to navigate the various levels of reality after death, how to recognize the archons when they present themselves as angels, how to speak the names and signs and passwords that allow the soul to pass through their realms without being captured, how to avoid the lure of the false lights and continue ascending until reaching the true pleroma, the fullness of divine reality that exists beyond all of these counterfeit constructs. This teaching was considered so dangerous, so subversive to religious and political control, that when the institutional church gained enough power, it systematically destroyed every community that taught it. Think about why this would be. If people understood that they carry divinity within themselves, that they do not need external authorities to access the divine, that the goal is not to be good obedient believers who follow rules, but to awaken to direct knowledge of their true nature, then the entire structure of religious control collapses. If people understood that death is not the end but a transition that requires knowledge and vigilance, that there are deceptive forces seeking to recycle their consciousness, that liberation requires seeing through illusions rather than surrendering to comforting beliefs, then they would not be so easily controlled, manipulated, pacified. The promise of heaven has been used for 2,000 years to keep people obedient, to make them accept suffering and injustice in this life with the hope of reward in the next. But what if the reward itself is another layer of the trap? What if heaven, as it has been presented to you, is just another room in the prison? A more comfortable cell perhaps, but still part of the system designed to keep your divine spark from returning to its true source. Let me share with you the experience of someone who encountered this teaching and began to understand its implications. A man I will call Michael, who came to one of my workshops several years ago, deeply troubled because he had recently lost his father and had been present at the moment of death. Michael described how his father, in those final moments, suddenly became peaceful. His eyes focused on something invisible, and he whispered that he saw angels, that he saw his deceased wife, Michael's mother, beckoning him toward a beautiful light, and then he was gone. And Michael, who had been raised Christian, initially felt comfort in this, believing his father had gone to heaven, had been greeted by angels and reunited with his beloved wife. But then Michael began having recurring dreams where his father appeared confused, trapped, calling out for help but unable to explain what was wrong. And these dreams disturbed Michael so deeply that he began researching, reading everything he could find about death, about the afterlife, about different spiritual traditions and their teachings. And this is how he found the Gnostic texts. And when he read about the white light trap, about the archons disguising themselves as angels and loved ones to lure souls into reincarnation, something in him recognized this as truth, not because he wanted to believe his father was trapped, quite the opposite, but because it explained so much that had never made sense. Why mystics throughout history warned against following lights and voices, why shamanic traditions teach about trickster spirits and false guides, why the Egyptian Book of the Dead provides detailed instructions for navigating the afterlife, rather than just telling people to follow the light, why the Tibetan Bardo teachings describe multiple realms and illusions that the consciousness encounters between death and rebirth. Michael spent months in deep contemplation and practice, working with the Gnostic techniques for expanding consciousness while still alive, and eventually he reported experiencing what he described as a direct knowing, not a belief, not a hope, but a certainty that his father's soul, like all souls, was cycling through the system, and that the only way to truly help was not through prayers to external deities, but through his own awakening, through achieving gnosis himself, so that eventually, over whatever lifetimes it took, he could serve as a conscious guide for others. This might sound dark, it might sound hopeless, but actually it is the opposite. It is the most empowering spiritual teaching I have ever encountered, because it places the power and responsibility directly in your hands. It says that you are not a helpless sinner dependent on the grace of external gods. You are a divine being with the inherent capacity to see through all illusions and return to your true nature. And the path to doing this is gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of reality, not belief, not faith, not obedience, but awakening. The Gnostic practices for achieving this awakening are designed to expand your consciousness while you are still alive, to give you direct experience of the multiple levels of reality, to teach you how to navigate non-physical realms, how to recognize archonic deceptions, how to remember your true nature as divine light rather than identifying with the material body and personality you currently inhabit. These practices include forms of contemplative meditation that are radically different from the mindfulness techniques that have been sanitized for modern consumption. These are techniques for deliberately leaving the body, for exploring the astral realms, for encountering the archonic forces directly so that you become familiar with their tactics, their appearance, their energy signature, and when you encounter them at death, you will not be deceived. The practices include intense self-inquiry, asking again and again, who am I really? What is this reality? What am I beyond this body and mind and personality? Questioning every assumption, every belief, every identification, until you have stripped away all the false layers and touched the core of pure consciousness that cannot be destroyed or trapped or manipulated. The practices include working with the Gnostic prayers and invocations found in texts like the Pistis Sophia, phrases and names that were understood to carry power, not magical power in a superstitious sense, but cognitive keys, linguistic formulas that shift consciousness, that open doors of perception, that remind the divine spark within you of its true nature and origin. Seekers who commit to these practices with genuine sincerity and daily dedication report profound shifts in their consciousness, not after years of practice but often within weeks or months. They describe experiencing themselves as awareness rather than as a body, witnessing thoughts and emotions arise without being identified with them, experiencing brief moments where the veil becomes transparent, and they can see the mechanical, programmed nature of consensus reality, the ways that media and culture and social conditioning work to keep consciousness focused on material concerns and prevent any real questioning of the fundamental nature of existence. They report beginning to remember fragments of other lifetimes, not in a past life regression therapy sense, but spontaneous knowings that arise during deep meditation, memories of having been here before, of having died before, of having been trapped in the cycle before, and these memories are not comforting. They are disturbing precisely because they reveal the scope of the prison, but they are also liberating because remembering is the first step toward breaking free. They describe encounters during meditation or dreams with entities that present themselves as guides or teachers, and rather than automatically trusting these entities as New Age spirituality encourages, they question them, test them, observe how these entities respond to being challenged, and in many cases they discover that what appeared as a benevolent guide was actually attempting to harvest energy, to create dependence, to lead consciousness away from true sovereignty and back toward external authority. These are not pleasant experiences. Awakening is not always comfortable. Seeing through illusions that have structured your entire understanding of reality is profoundly disorienting. But it is necessary, it is real, it is the actual path of liberation rather than the false comfort of believing that you just need to be a good person and have faith and everything will magically work out when you die. Let me tell you about another seeker, a woman I will call Sarah, who came to this knowledge from a completely different direction than Michael. Sarah had a near-death experience at age 28 during a surgical complication, and like most people who have NDEs, she encountered the white light. She felt overwhelming peace and love. She saw what appeared to be deceased relatives, and she was moving toward the light, completely surrendered, completely trusting when something unexpected happened. She heard a voice, not external but from deep within her own consciousness, and the voice said, "Remember who you are." And in that instant, something shifted. The entire scene, which had felt utterly real and divine, suddenly appeared artificial, like a projection, like a simulation, and she became aware that she had a choice, that she could continue toward this light, or she could choose something else, something the light was obscuring, and when she made the intention to see what was being hidden, the entire near-death experience collapsed like a stage set, and behind it, she perceived something vast, infinite, nothing like the structured narrative experience she had been having, but rather pure undifferentiated consciousness without form or story, and then she was back in her body, confused, shaken, unable to reconcile what she had experienced with what she had been taught about death and heaven. Sarah spent years trying to understand what had happened, consulting with NDE researchers, spiritual teachers, reading mystical texts from every tradition, and when she finally encountered the Gnostic teachings about the white light trap, about the archons creating convincing illusions to capture souls, everything crystallized. She realized that what she had experienced was not a hallucination or a brain malfunction, but an actual encounter with the reincarnation machinery, and she had almost been captured by it, and only that inner voice, that fragment of gnosis that had not been completely suppressed by incarnation, had saved her. Sarah now teaches others about conscious dying, about preparing for death not by accumulating good karma or believing correct doctrines, but by expanding awareness, by learning to recognize illusion, by practicing navigating altered states of consciousness so that when death comes, the soul is not vulnerable to deception. If what you are hearing right now resonates deeply, if you feel in your core that this explains something you have always intuited but could not articulate, then you need to understand that this knowledge comes with responsibility. The Gnostics did not teach that. Because the world is a prison, you should check out, become nihilistic, stop caring about anything. Quite the opposite, they taught that because you are a divine spark temporarily inhabiting this realm, you have a sacred duty to awaken as fully as possible, to help other divine sparks awaken, to live with integrity and consciousness and compassion, not because a god in the sky is judging you, but because that is the natural expression of awakened consciousness. You are here to remember, to see through, to prepare for the moment of death when you will be tested, when everything you have learned and practiced will either serve you or fail you. This is why the Gnostic path is not about belief, not about joining a church or following a guru. It is about direct practice, daily contemplation, rigorous self-inquiry, fearless exploration of consciousness, and gradually building the capacity to see through illusion not just intellectually but experientially, viscerally, in your actual moment-to-moment perception of reality. If this knowledge has expanded your consciousness and you feel you have finally found a guide who understands your Gnostic journey, who respects your individual search for truth, then leave your like on this video right now so that more seekers can discover these hidden teachings. And if you have not yet subscribed, subscribe now and activate notifications because next week I will be revealing another suppressed teaching from the Nag Hammadi texts, specifically about the Archons, about how they operate in the modern world, how they manipulate through media and technology and culture, how they feed on specific emotional states, and most importantly, how you can protect your consciousness from their influence while you are still alive so that you are building strength and awareness for the ultimate test that comes at death. I want to continue being your mentor and friend on this path of awakening. I do not want you to walk alone through this obscure journey, and this channel exists for sincere seekers like you, for those who have always known that mainstream religion was hiding essential truths, and I promise you that every video I create goes deeper, reveals more, provides practical methods that you can use immediately, because knowledge without practice is worthless, and I am committed to giving you both. What I am about to share now is the most practical and essential part of this entire teaching, because understanding the cosmology is important, understanding why the white light is a trap is crucial, but none of it matters if you do not know what to actually do, both while you are alive to prepare and at the moment of death, when you are confronted with these archonic illusions. The first and most important practice is developing witness consciousness, the ability to observe your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and experiences without being identified with them, without believing that they are you. Most people live their entire lives completely identified with their mental and emotional content. They are not aware that they are awareness itself. They believe they are their thoughts, their memories, their personality, their story. And this identification is exactly what the archonic system depends on. Because as long as you believe you are this limited, temporary construct, you will be terrified of death. You will grasp at any promise of continuation, any comforting illusion, including the white light trap. When you practice witnessing, sitting in meditation and simply observing the mind without engaging with it, without believing it, without following its narratives, you begin to discover that you are not the content of consciousness. You are consciousness itself. You are the awareness in which all content appears. And this awareness has no beginning or end. It cannot be born or die. It is eternal and it is what you truly are. This is not philosophy. This is direct experience that arises through sustained practice. And every moment you spend in this witnessing awareness is strengthening your ability to maintain consciousness and identity outside of the body-mind construct. The second practice is what the Gnostics called self-inquiry or contemplation, which goes beyond witnessing into active questioning of the nature of reality itself. You must learn to question everything you have been taught, everything you assume is true, not just intellectually but in deep meditation, asking, what is this world really? Who created it? What is my true nature? Why do I feel trapped here? And then sitting in silence with these questions, not seeking intellectual answers but allowing gnosis to arise, allowing direct knowing to emerge from the depths of your being. This practice dissolves the conditioning that keeps you enslaved to consensus reality. It breaks down the programming that says you must accept the world as it appears, that you must trust authorities, that you must believe what you are told, and it opens you to direct perception of the multi-layered nature of reality. The fact that the physical world is just the densest layer of a complex system of control, and beyond it exist other realms, other dimensions, and ultimately the pleroma itself, your true home. Many seekers report that after months of sincere self-inquiry, they begin having spontaneous experiences of expanded consciousness, moments where they see through the illusion of matter and perceive the energy structures beneath, moments where time becomes fluid or stops entirely, moments where they experience themselves as infinite rather than limited. And these experiences are not hallucinations or wishful thinking. They are glimpses of your true nature breaking through the veil of illusion that has kept you trapped. The third practice is working with the Gnostic invocations and prayers found in texts like the Pistis Sophia and the books of Je, which contain specific phrases, names, and formulas that were understood to carry tremendous spiritual power. These are not prayers in the sense of begging an external god for favors. They are linguistic keys that shift consciousness, that remind your divine spark of its origin, that invoke the true powers of the pleroma rather than the false authorities of the archonic realm. When you recite these invocations with focused intention and understanding of their meaning, you are programming your consciousness with the knowledge and power it will need to navigate the after-death realms. You are essentially installing the passwords and recognition codes that will allow you to pass through the various levels without being captured by the archonic authorities that guard each gateway. The texts are explicit about this. They describe the soul ascending through multiple levels after death, encountering rulers and authorities at each level who demand to know by what right the soul is passing through their domain, and the soul must speak the correct names, show the correct signs, demonstrate knowledge of the mysteries in order to continue ascending rather than being turned back or recycled. This is not about memorizing magic words. This is about encoding deep understanding into your consciousness so that even in the disoriented state following death, your soul retains the knowledge and power needed to see through deception and continue its journey to true liberation. The fourth practice, and perhaps the most advanced, is what some traditions call astral projection or out-of-body experience, deliberately leaving the physical body while still alive and exploring the non-physical realms. This practice serves multiple purposes. First, it proves to you experientially that you are not your body, that consciousness can exist and function independently of physical form, which dissolves one of the primary fears that keeps people trapped, the fear of death as annihilation. Second, it allows you to encounter and become familiar with the types of entities and realms you will meet at actual death, so that when the moment comes, you are not confused or vulnerable but experienced and capable. Third, it gives you practice in navigating by intention and awareness rather than by physical senses, which is exactly the skill you will need when you no longer have a physical body. Seekers who develop proficiency in conscious astral travel report encounters with beings that present themselves as guides, angels, ascended masters, deceased loved ones, and through these encounters, they learn to discern authentic spiritual presence from archonic imitation. They learn what questions to ask, what responses reveal truth versus manipulation. They learn to recognize the energy signature of true divine light versus the false light of the archonic trap. Some report actually encountering the white light trap during astral travel, approaching it to see what it is, testing it, observing how it responds, and discovering that when challenged, when questioned, when approached with sovereign consciousness rather than desperate need, it reveals itself as a construct, an energetic mechanism rather than the actual divine. These experiences are not for everyone. They require courage and significant preparation, but for those called to this level of practice, they provide invaluable knowledge that cannot be obtained any other way. There is also a practice that the Cathars taught extensively before they were massacred by the Catholic Church in the 13th century, a ritual they called the consolamentum, which was given to seekers who had prepared their entire lives for conscious death. The consolamentum was an initiation that was believed to sever the soul's attachment to the material realm and ensure that at death, the soul would have the knowledge and power to avoid the reincarnation trap and return directly to the true God beyond the demiurge. The Church declared this ritual heresy and murdered hundreds of thousands of Cathars specifically to prevent this knowledge from spreading, and the fact that the institutional Church was willing to commit genocide to suppress a teaching about conscious death tells you everything about how threatening this knowledge is to systems of control. The core of what the Cathars taught, and what you can apply even without the formal ritual, is the importance of releasing all attachment to the material world before death. Not in the sense of becoming cold or uncaring, but in the sense of deeply understanding that nothing in this realm is permanent, nothing here is your true home. Every attachment is a chain that can be used to pull you back into incarnation. They taught practices of radical simplicity, of living in the world but not being of the world, of treating all material circumstances with equanimity because you understand they are temporary illusions. And this teaching is actually deeply liberating because it removes the desperate grasping that causes so much suffering, the fear of loss, the anxiety about the future, the clinging to pleasure and avoidance of pain. When you deeply know that all of this is temporary illusion, you can participate in it without being enslaved by it. Let me share one more account. This one from a seeker I will call David, who had been practicing Gnostic techniques for 7 years when his mother entered her final days of life with cancer. David sat with her every day, and instead of the usual deathbed prayers asking God to take her to heaven, he spoke to her about Gnosis, about her true nature as divine light, about the journey she was about to take and the importance of staying conscious, of questioning everything she encountered, of not surrendering to the first beautiful light or comforting presence but holding fast to the intention to reach the true pleroma beyond all illusion. His family thought he was being cruel, denying his mother the comfort of traditional beliefs. But his mother, who had always been a questioner, listened intently, and in those final conversations, she expressed that what he was saying felt more true than anything she had heard in church. When she died, David reported that rather than the usual grief and worry, he felt a sense of trust, not blind faith, but trust based on his own gnosis that his mother now had the knowledge she needed to navigate consciously. And in the weeks following her death, he had several profound meditation experiences where he felt her presence, not trapped or confused as Michael had felt with his father, but free, ascending, grateful for the knowledge he had given her. Now you might ask, how did David know these experiences were real and not just wishful thinking? And the answer is that Gnosis has a quality of certainty that is unmistakable when you experience it. It is not belief, not hope, not imagination. It is direct knowing that arises from consciousness itself. And those who have experienced it cannot doubt it any more than they can doubt that they are aware right now. Everything I have shared with you in this video, from the Gnostic cosmology of the Demiurge and the Archons, to the understanding of the white light trap, to the practical techniques for preparing for conscious death, all of this represents knowledge that was deliberately suppressed because it is genuinely liberating, because it breaks the chains of control, because it reveals that you do not need priests or churches or institutions to access the divine. You need only to awaken to what you already are, divine light temporarily clothed in matter. And here is the most important thing I can tell you. This is not just ancient history. This is not just theoretical spirituality. This is urgently practical knowledge that applies to you right now. Because you are going to die, your body will cease functioning, your consciousness will leave physical form, and at that moment, you will be tested. You will encounter the white light or something like it. Beings will appear to guide you. Voices will call you home, and everything will depend on whether you have the knowledge and the practice to see through the illusion, to remember who you truly are, to navigate consciously rather than surrendering to the first comforting appearance. This is why I am passionate about sharing this knowledge, why I create these videos week after week, why I have dedicated my life to studying and practicing and teaching the Gnostic path. Because I believe with every fiber of my being that this is the most important knowledge a human being can possess, and it has been stolen from us, hidden from us, declared heresy and dangerous, precisely because it is genuinely empowering. If you have made it this far in the video, you are not a casual viewer, you are a seeker, someone whose soul recognizes this truth even if your mind is still processing it, and I want to invite you to take action right now, not just passive consumption but active engagement with this path. First, like this video if you have not already, because that simple action helps the algorithm share this knowledge with others who need it. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications, because I am releasing new teachings every week, going deeper into the Gnostic texts, exploring practical techniques, examining how the archonic system operates in the modern world, and I want you to be part of this community of awakening seekers. Third, write in the comments what aspect of this teaching resonated most powerfully with you, what questions it raised, what experiences you have had that relate to this material, because your engagement strengthens this community and helps others who are just beginning their journey to feel less alone. And fourth, share this video with someone you know who is ready for this knowledge, someone who has always questioned mainstream religion, someone who has had unexplainable experiences, someone who you recognize as a fellow divine spark seeking to remember its true nature. In the coming weeks, I will be diving deeper into specific practices you can begin immediately. I will be analyzing particular passages from the Nag Hammadi texts that provide detailed instructions for navigating the after-death realms. I will be discussing how to recognize archonic influence in daily life, in relationships, in media, in the subtle ways consciousness is manipulated to keep you focused on material concerns and prevent true awakening, and I will be sharing more accounts from seekers who are actively practicing this path and experiencing profound transformations. This is not entertainment. This is not spiritual bypassing or New Age fantasy. This is the real work of consciousness liberation, and it requires commitment, courage, and daily practice. But I promise you there is nothing more worthwhile you can dedicate your life to than remembering who you truly are, and preparing for the moment when you will have the opportunity to break free from the prison of matter and return to your true home in the pleroma, the fullness of divine light and absolute freedom that is your birthright as a divine being. The knowledge you have received today was kept hidden for over 1500 years. Seekers were tortured and killed to protect it. Entire libraries were burned. Texts were buried in desert caves, all to prevent you from knowing the truth about the white light, about the reincarnation trap, about your true nature as divine consciousness. That you are hearing this now is not an accident. It is synchronicity. It is your soul calling you to awaken, and what you do with this knowledge is entirely your choice. You can dismiss it, return to comfortable beliefs, trust that everything will be fine if you just have faith and follow the light when you die. Or you can take responsibility for your own liberation. Begin practicing the techniques I have shared. Study the Gnostic texts yourself. Develop your own direct knowing rather than depending on external authorities, and prepare consciously for the most important test of your existence. I cannot make this choice for you. No one can. Because that is the entire point. You are a sovereign divine being with the capacity to choose liberation or continued imprisonment, and that choice is yours alone. But if you choose the path of Gnosis, the path of awakening, the path of conscious liberation, then know that you are not alone. There is a community of seekers walking this path. There are teachers and guides who have gone before and returned to help. And there is a living tradition of Gnostic practice that has survived centuries of persecution precisely because this truth cannot be destroyed. It can only be suppressed temporarily, and it always rises again because it is encoded in the deepest part of your being, waiting to be remembered. Welcome to your awakening. Welcome to the Gnostic path, and remember the light you seek is not out there, not in the white tunnel at death, but within you, the divine spark that has always been there, waiting for you to recognize it and claim your freedom.